everyone. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Storytime with Tanya. Thank you for joining me for this new story called The Dinner Party. In the heart of Manhattan's Upper East Side, a sleek new apartment building stood like a gleaming monument to wealth. One of its most recent residents, an enigmatic man in his mid 30s, had only recently hit the $1 billion jackpot. The city buzzed with whispers about him. No one seemed to know much. He was a quiet, reserved figure whose fortune had turned him into a modern day celebrity. His name was Nicholas Grant, and tonight he was hosting a dinner party for three strangers, though they hardly felt like strangers. It was an exclusive evening, one that none of the invited guests would ever have imagined. The invitations, hand delivered to their penthouses, were elegant but cryptic. A dinner awaits to meet the man whose luck changed the world. We hope you'll join us at 8 p.m. on the 38th floor. For each guest, it was an opportunity, but also a mystery. Lena Sinclair had been one of Hollywood's brightest stars for over a decade. Known for her beauty and depth, she had starred in everything from indie dramas to blockbuster franchises. But fame had begun to wear thin. She wanted more. She wanted a conversation that mattered, a moment of connection that wasn't just about her image. The invitation intrigued her. Elliot Miller, the music producer, had helped shape some of the biggest names in pop and hip hop. His empire of platinum records and chart toppers had made him a name in the music industry, but he was tired of the games, the endless meetings, the egos. An evening spent in a mystery billionaire's penthouse was just the kind of distraction he craved. His curiosity was piqued. And then there was Senator Richard Klein, a rising star in New York politics. Charismatic and sharp, Klein had risen through the ranks quickly. His influence was spreading, and his image as a man of the people was starting to gain him national attention. But beneath that polished exterior, Klein had secrets. Secrets that not even the highest office in the land could conceal. The invitation to dinner felt more like an ultimatum than an invitation. When Lena, Elliot, and Richard arrived, they were greeted by a flawless, open foyer of glass and marble. The views from the 38th floor were breathtaking, stretching across the entire city skyline, with the glittering lights of Manhattan forming a backdrop. Nicholas Grant stood by the bar, a tall man with striking features, wearing a dark suit that fit him perfectly. His smile, but his eyes seemed distant, as though he was scanning for something far beyond the physical realm. "Welcome! I'm glad you could make it," he said, his voice calm and smooth. Lena smiled, ever the professional. "This place is breathtaking. You really did win the lottery, didn't you?" she said, glancing at the expansive space. Nicholas chuckled softly. "I suppose you could say that, though I prefer to think of it as something more permanent." Elliot raised an eyebrow. "Are you a man who believes in fate, then?" Nicholas didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured towards The long white marble dining table where four plates were set, each with a delicate, intricate arrangement of food. I think we're all here because of fate, but more importantly, Nicholas paused, I've invited you because in one way or another, your paths have crossed with mine. The other three exchanged curious glances as they took their seats. The first course was a elegant tartare, served with a light champagne. As they began to eat, conversation flowed easily at first. Lena asked about Nicholas's recent success. Elliot probed into his childhood. Richard circled around his political views. But as the courses came and went, the mood shifted subtly. Lena, who had spent years in the spotlight, grew unnerved by how little she knew about this man. Despite all his wealth and notoriety, she finally broke the silence. You've been a bit of a mystery. How did you come by all this wealth? A lottery win? Or is there more to it? Nicholas set down his wine glass and met her gaze, his eyes narrowing slightly. It wasn't a typical lottery. You could say I won a ticket to something much bigger than money. Elliot leaned forward intrigued. And what exactly is that something bigger? An opportunity, Nicholas replied, to take everything we know, everything we've worked for, and build something different. I believe. An opportunity, Nicholas replied, to take everything we know, everything we've worked for, and build something different. I believe we all have the ability to shape the world. And sometimes the best way to do that is by leveraging the most powerful force of all, wealth. Richard, who had remained largely quiet, stirred his wine thoughtfully. That's an interesting philosophy, he said, his voice low. But let me ask you this. With power comes responsibility. What's your responsibility in all this? Or are you simply trying to make a mark like everyone else? Nicholas smiled. A good question, Senator. But I think the world has enough responsible men. I'm more interested in what happens when people stop pretending to be good and start thinking of themselves. What does the world look like then? The words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one spoke. As dessert arrived, an exquisite chocolate mousse, Nicholas leaned back on his chair and turned his attention to each guest. You all have something that most people can only dream of: power, influence, and recognition. But I wonder, how often do you question the very systems that give you those things? Lena shifted uncomfortably. Are you saying we've been playing into something corrupt? Nicholas's eyes flickered. Not corrupt, just predictable. Everyone plays by the same old rules, rules designed by a few, for a few. But it doesn't have to be that way. Richard frowned. Are you proposing some sort of revolution? Nicholas's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. Not a revolution, just a shift, a new order. And it starts with people like you. We are already in positions to influence the world. What happens when we choose to break away from the constraints we've been given? There was a pause as the three of them processed his words. As the night wore on, the conversation became more philosophical, more abstract. Nicholas didn't reveal much more about himself, but by the time they said their goodbyes, the tension in the room had shifted. They had all felt it. The quiet, undeniable pull of a man who had nothing to lose, and who seemed to hold the world in his hands. Lena, Elliot, and Richard left the penthouse feeling unsettled. but also strangely intrigued. Each one had walked into that apartment seeking something, but what they had left with was something more elusive, a feeling that their lives were about to change in a way they couldn't yet understand. As the door closed behind them, Nicholas Grant stood alone by the window, gazing out over the city. In the distance, the skyline twinkled, but for him, it felt as though the whole world was watching. He had planted the seeds. Now, it was only a matter of time before they grew. The end. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Storytime with Tanya.